Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, everybody. We had a brilliant session last time, so I'm really hoping we can continue what we started with a good session tonight. We are on chapter 6 of the book, so we're checking out the components. There are 8 in total, but we knew when we were planning this that data and information were two such really hot topics. We thought we'd try and put them into one, and even that didn't work. We got through information and we didn't even get round to AI. So tonight we're going to try and get through data and consider if we were rewriting the book today or doing at least a refresh on this section, what would that look like in light of AI and all the things we'd have to consider for that. So that's the purpose. Hopefully, at least some of you have managed to do the actual reading. It's quite a small section of the book. And we'll get started. Although, just to note, we do actually have book club merchandise now. So I will be supping from my book club cup here. Just a little reminder, we are a community interest company, and this is one way you can support us is with nice bits of merch from the shop on the store. Brilliant. All right, David, let's get into it. Data. What's our first question prompt of the night? I think it'd be best if you could just share the prompt anyway. Cool. So there's our first prompt. So Big tells us that good information is only possible with accurate, traceable and timely data. We could definitely dig deep into each of those adjectives. But our first discussion question is, do you design data from requirements or do you inherit it from systems? So Big, we're very keen that you should define your information needs first and then design data to support it. But you look like you are back, David. But in many organisations, we do find that we have to work with what we've got, and sometimes we are sorely limited. So, open to the floor. In your organisation, is data driven by governance need or by system limitations? I'd like to get us started.
Well, I'm happy to start if nobody else is.
Please go ahead, Chris.
I think in cases where I've seen governance working, right, it has been designed for governance from the word go. So we've looked at what we need for governance, what kind of data, both to support governance, but for assurance, for decision making, all of those things. And then designed the governance process and the gathering, reporting of data, etc., to support that. So very much a governance-driven selection. And then there's always a point where you've got your idea of what you need for your governance and the process you're going to use to review governance, etc. And then you look at what data you actually have. And then you have to decide what kind of compromises you might have to make. And that might be a time issue. So right now, we don't capture any measures on that thing in that way. And it's going to take us 6 or 12 months to do that, right? Or it's going to be too expensive this year to do that kind of change. And then we're going to compromise and find proxies for some of that governance data. But definitely starting with the governance design.
And then perhaps moving through a sort of evolutionary process of so this is what we'd like, gap analysis, this is what we can actually get, what can we usefully fill in and as we move things forward? Is that what you're describing, Chris?
Yeah, but I think that's the principle is very much around making sure we get what we need for governance first, right? And then if we do have to compromise that for practicalities, we can do that to some limited extent. So the design process very much focusing on picking the kind of measures and data and things that we can get from the word go, if you like. But definitely in some cases there has to be a compromise. And then the dynamics of that is that not that we try and find more compromises as time goes by, but that we actually then work as a governance design continuation, right? That we're going to work on getting rid of these compromises and getting to the data we really want. And of course, that changes over time as well. So it's a dynamic process. But the emphasis is on getting closer to the governance design as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Okay, David, did you have your hand up?
I did, yeah. I did. What Chris explains there is absolutely, I totally agree with that. That if we're looking to build a governance process, then what information do we need? What information do we got? What information do we additionally need to get? The only worry is I don't think that's how organizations work. Who is that person that's going to do that that analysis that Chris has perfectly described? I think that's a worry. What do you guys think?
Well, I think we've done that several times, and I think it's a standard process if you're going to go into governance or strategy execution or any of those things, even if it's big three governance, that you use that approach. And I don't think it's really that difficult. It's something you have to do. I think it's a little bit complicated, but it's fairly simple.
I think some organizations do it to a certain extent. I've seen a lot of organizations that have done it to sort of 90 to 95%, but I've seen a huge amount, or the majority of organizations, where no, and it would be a benefit to them if they did what you just described, Chris.
Yeah, I can cite organizations as well that have not done it the right way, right? That have said, yes, we want governance, whatever form of governance that is. Very seldom was it truly integrated governance, but this type of governance. And the governance people have been really left to try and find what data they can. And as a result, exactly as you say, Alex, that they end up with data which is almost what nobody else wants or cares enough about to stop them getting at it or something like that, right? And what they can afford in terms of a budget they're given to implement this, they may well not have the opportunity to step in and say, no, you're going to change the way you collect data in the system now to support governance. That can be quite difficult if that governance effort does not have the right support. And yes, I think there are lots of organizations, and we've worked in some of those as well. And that's why I prefaced my earlier thing with where I've seen it working. I have also seen it not working. And that's simply because there wasn't the support to make this governance a priority and say, yes, we have to get the right design for the governance data, right? And then it's exactly as you say, that people might do something, but it's not going to work out that way. And I wouldn't know what the percentage is of companies that have done it and maintained it the right way, and those that have done it and are sort of halfway there, and those that have done nothing and are nowhere there.
I must admit that in the PMO space, I personally find that where we don't have proper tooling, I spend tremendous amounts of time trying to basically recreate tooling in things like Excel and having to put more and more fields in for things that we could probably easily extract from a system, just to try and drive towards governance items we would like, such as risk information. Do other people find that?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've seen also seen horrors of spreadsheets set up to try and bring in, governance data from multiple units, whether that's in a P3 type setting or whether that's in strategy delivery or whatever. And yeah, it just becomes a nightmare because the spreadsheets just become, typically after the first review session over 35 different units or something, the spreadsheets are now a complete mess. and they're broken formulae and all kinds of things all over the place in all of these different worksheets that are supposed to link together. And it becomes a bigger job to get the spreadsheet working than it is to actually get governance working.
Yeah, I definitely agree and hear that one. Especially the broken spreadsheets that no one knows how to maintain.
Chris,
all right, anybody?
Do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. What really strikes me is that there's probably, for every governance decision, there's probably a limited set of standard bits of information that are required. Mainly the context in which the governance is operating, i.e. all the other things around the item. So in the world of P3M, that would be the portfolio. How is the portfolio performing before we decide that we're going to approve or reject a project or retard a project or whatever? And my experience is that the senior decision makers typically think they want more information than they actually need. And that creates a frenzy of collection and going down into detail that's not necessary to make the decision. And I think in my mind, the random collecting of data and spreadsheets is behavioral rather than necessary.
I think there's definitely something in that, Chris, isn't there? We all know some execs don't like a lot of detail. Some of them really like a lot of detail. David?
Do we differentiate between information we need to capture on a one-off basis to make a specific decision, which might well be needs something specific manufactured, and the ongoing tending and gate type decisions that's more business as usual? Are governance sessions more like prototype Formula One cars, or can we make them like mass-produced Audis that are a little bit more reliable and easy to manage? So it's clearly if we're having to make Formula One cars, then where we're going to get that from, it might come from anywhere. But if it's more like that expensive and sophisticated Audi or Mercedes, then we've got a chance of building for manufacture.
I think, David, you can decide how to facilitate that. So, for example, in a portfolio management scenario where the portfolio is not just approving a project to start, but it's also approving the transition gates to make sure that there's an ongoing business case and that portfolio still supports it, then you've got a base load of information that is contextual, and you always need to have that as up to date as it can be. Maybe you want to actually produce that once every month or once every week or whatever, so that it's baselined and everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet. The specific requests, I'm talking very very directly to the P3M and gate approval through a portfolio type discussion. That's still got quite a small set of information, mainly around the business case, but also around what is the broad. So the project can bring the information about the business case, because it owns it. The sponsor owns that information, and the sponsor owns asking, can we have some more money, or can we change things up a little bit? But I think whoever's running the portfolio has to be able to put that request into the context of the portfolio, so that the decision isn't just a project decision, but it's also a business decision. So what I'm talking about here is, let's say, for example, that some portfolio steering board or approvals board authorizes spend at gates or at change requests between gates. So the project doesn't really care where the money comes from. It cares that there's money, for example, and therefore somebody needs to be able to say, well, here are the options. This is a really high profile and priority project. So what we could do is retard one of the other projects, which is maybe less impactful, and it will be less sensitive to dates changing, and reallocate funds from the central allocation. Now, it doesn't mean that the donor project gets less money. It just gets less money in the time period before you can do a reset. But every organization I've been in has tried to make it too complicated, with the end result that you sit in a governance meeting and the ask and the grant are not clear enough, and that breaks governance. Sorry, that was a ramble. I'm good for those.
Mr. Bragg, you also have your hand up.
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, I think, Chris, as you're quite right. In the instances where we've seen it working, particularly we were setting up balanced scorecard and strategy delivery cascaded down through organizations. And that problem was addressed because the management teams themselves know what their particular objectives for their unit is, and that's already been aligned with the rest of the organization. And they look at the portfolio of initiatives and projects that they need to achieve that, and they look at what other things they have going on. And where we succeeded in getting that aligned with the budget, then you have a very clear decision-making process where the management team is reviewing all of these projects and where they are and what status they're in, etc., and deciding which ones get funding now and which ones get funding later and which ones no longer need funding, right? And it's all built within that structure. So that keeps them focused on delivering strategic objectives across multiple perspectives, not just finance or what's profitable or anything else, but across all the strategic objectives. And that makes it a lot easier. Where we could not get things like the budget process aligned with the strategy process, then there were continually those kind of issues around which projects are going to get the funding. And that led to all kinds of problems. And at the very least, 3 to 6 month delays on funding, which didn't help any projects at all.
Alex.
Right. I may have been misunderstanding what some people have just said, but I actually want to take this wider. So when we're reviewing our stage gates, we have to be aware. It's not just, are we within tolerance? Are we still looking plausible and credible? We have to be aware of what's going on outside of the project, what's going on in the general business. Is this project still worthwhile? Should we amend this project because of other things that are going on in the business? So that's taking it a bit wider. The other thing I wanted to say is we're talking from a P3M perspective here, and I would like Mr. Dunning's input. To what extent should we be looking at, should we be comparing with data for wider business governance, not just through for change? Is that going to be a far wider data set? Now, I think we need to be aware of that wider data set, or certainly the run aspects of the business, so that we can review our projects against what's actually happening in the wider environment at that time. But I'm very interested to look at this from a business perspective, not just the P3M narrower slice. David, tell me, am I right, wrong, or barking up the incorrect tree as usual?
My opinion is a project program. They're just entities like any other business entities might be, and a project entity might have a decision, and it will have issues, it will have risks, it will have objectives, it will have tasks, it will have resource needs. And it just so happens that that's for a finite package of work, but a product which has a longer life cycle will also have issues, risks, objectives, tasks, resource needs. A business as usual work stream will a finance function will have issues, risks, objectives, tasks, and resources. To my mind, there's a common data model of information that we need to underpin decision making, aside from the Formula One style specifics of what a particular decision is. But I think what I'm hearing mostly is that everyone's been saying, I think, that we need to pull we need to have governance pull what the information need is, but I'm not hearing that that's primarily how people are set up and how they're seeing it. So I'm not hearing that it's the norm for organizations to be led by what information needs they produce, by what governance needs they have.
We had Chris and David's just taken his hand down, so I don't know if he still wants to speak or not. But Chris, you were first, so
yeah, I think this raises an interesting concept right the way across Big, and I suspect most of us are P3M type professionals here and are very in tune with governance as a topic because it's one of the topics that is deeply embedded in life cycles of projects, programs, portfolio, change, right across the board. So in my experience of other organizations, or in fact, all the organizations that I drop into and drop out of, firstly, there is no central governance authority. So who governs the governance? And that would generate potentially the big picture system of all governance in an organization. Now, organizations these days are kind of fighting against that kind of stuff because they like to be agile and divisional directorates have their own ways of making decisions because they're the experts in that decision making. So what I think it's natural for us to be P3M centric in our discussions here, but I'm kind of lost as to what other organizations are, what other divisions within an organization are good candidates for having decent governance around them. So I can see risk management is one. But not a lot of organizations really do proper risk management unless you're sitting in the maybe the financial sector, maybe the defense sector. There's probably some more as well, but there's so many that don't do real organization-wide risk management. Financial governance is quite easy because they do that through their budgets and what's sitting in treasury. So if it ain't there, you can't spend it unless you can go out and raise funds. So that there's kind of a natural way of doing that in finance organizations, because it's a finite resource. It's almost portfolio management, but only looking at the money, not looking at the benefits and the change. HR, I tend to perceive that as a reactive organization to the business, although there will be some governance elements, for example, banding, pay grades, how they do their performance management across the year. But when you start getting in towards operations, it's more process than governance driven, unless you have governance around the processes, which some mature operational organizations will have. But I'm kind of seeing it gets more esoteric and more sporadic. The deeper you get into the individual elements of companies that may or may not be different. So I'm wondering if like physics, the grand unified theory is still not real.
So I just answer that little piece. Talking of physics, there's a chap that's in the process of writing a book about entropy, about disorder, and the natural tendency of organisations to become more disordered as time goes by, and the idea that there needs to be a bit of force to stop all of our organisations decaying, whether they've got project governance, process governance, or whatever kind of governance there is. So definitely is some academic type thinking, which thinks more of governance and a big picture as being something that needs to be in some shape or form to stop the whole thing, to stop organisations continuing to decay into absolute chaos. I can't explain it in too much greater detail because he's going to produce the book yet. But that did I'm a reviewer, so I just found that very interesting what he said. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt then.
There's an interesting piece there where human systems are naturally chaotic because they have people in them, even when they're highly regulated and structured. And physics, it's not. So physics is governed by laws, and then how those laws manifest into systems. So I mean, thermodynamics is the area that everybody talks about entropy in.
Yeah.
But individual particles follow the rules because that's all they can do, and humans don't do that.
Well, grains of sand, they might be a nice castle on the beach that you cast initially, but as soon as you let the wind blow around it a little bit, it starts to disintegrate. So there's a case that talks about needing a constant bit of force to try and manage some order, whatever level of order that is. That's where
it's not inherent on the grains of sand, though, is it? It's inherent on how much water they've got that binds them together and how big and bad the wind actually is. Grains of sand, if they're not bound together nicely, they'll tumble because they're grains of sand that have to follow the laws of gravity at that point.
Yeah.
All right. I think it's nearly time to move on to prompt number 2. Sorry, David, you did put your hand down. Did you have anything you wanted to say, or we'll go to Chris if not?
I was actually. So I thought I had something to say. Then someone made such a great point. I was like, okay, I'm going to throw it off the piece here. But I just wanted to say, when you were talking about what data did you use to drive your project, and do you use the business data? Absolutely, you need to point into that at some point. For us, it's all about what KPIs are we leveraging by doing this thing, right? If we're not kind of making a pull on improving the business in some way, be it right first time or reduction in FTEs, whatever, you got to have that in there somewhere. It's almost impossible at times to drive that connection between your project to that. It's kind of a very thin connection, and you get lost trying to do that. So what you're then left with is your project data on about how you're performing, how you're delivering value, costs, and all that kind of good stuff, which has a varying degree of accuracy, I think, right? I think, as you were saying, Veronica, about how that seems to, over time, it seems to just blow up and become even more complicated, and you're getting different asks from information from your leadership and your governance, and they seem to, sometimes, depends on their approach, sometimes they're very specific and know what they want, other times they seem quite unsure, or what they're asking for gets misinterpreted, and you get this industry of data that gets created, which gets increasingly unreliable and an overhead, and then you have to come back and hack it down. I think that's what a lot of PMOs fall into, is you talk about those massive spreadsheets, and I've got plenty of those that emerge, and you get this industry that comes in and the data quality collapses and the asks keep changing. So I think when you build these kind of systems, you have to try and minimize that and try and get as much data that is the lifeblood of the company that drives it. You know, how much of it is already existing high quality data being used in other places. So I don't know if that really was the point I wanted to go to, but it's there. And I'd also make the point as well that one of the data areas I see that's emerging at real pace that I think you should give it some consideration to is human-centric data. Complete hand grenade throwing off balance there, but it's one of the really good predictors. The more you look at it, is at how actual humans are interacting with each other rather than just risk logs and all this kind of stuff, or other KPIs. I think you find a lot more early determination and real performance is going to come from that merged together. I think it's almost like a trifecta of pieces of data, almost like the project data, the business data, and the human-centric data. That's really what I was going to make. I'm not sure if that was quite as clear as I'd like to have been, but that's just what I was coming off my mind.
David, just you mean sentiment? You mean relationship quality? You mean that's the sort of thing you mean?
Yeah, sentiment analysis for sure. I think sentiment analysis, especially now that we're recording this call, you could drive a lot of sentiment analysis from this, and you can show that over time. You can show it to gate. You can show, the change in language. From we are going to do this to we hope to do this. You can start to get a view of that. That's a great indicator, and very difficult to manage that. I think that's something that's emerging, and there's lots of other areas you can start to drive that from as well. And then you merge that with your traditional risk data, your schedule data, your finance data. I think it gives you a much more holistic view of what's really happening. And I think we're getting to the inflection point. We can start pulling these things together. I'll shut up now. I could go forever about it.
No, that's interesting. And actually, when we come later to the question of what would we consider for some rewrites, that's actually considering the sort of depth, breadth, and richness of data is a consideration that we might like to consider, actually. So we had Chris and also Darren. So Chris, you were first.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I think the two Davids brought this up very well. And that's it. Culture forms a very big part of successful governance, of course. It's about people making decisions, and that's very much about behaviors of people, attitudes of people, relationships, trust relationships between different people, and what decisions they make. And so a lot of the data that we need for governance has to come out of that culture area. So that behavior, trust, relationships between people. It's one thing to have a contract. It's another thing to manage that contract in a way that really brings out the best of it for both parties. And that comes down to behavior and trust and relationships. So I think that's a big part of all of this, is making sure that you have in this governance that we've got people working the right way, in the right frames of mind to make the right decisions with the right kind of relationships that mean those are good decisions for everybody.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Darren, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I'm going back to my early days of back into the project world and the P3M world. I came a little bit late, but you were talking about governance and what Chris said, not giving too much away, but my role is governance of governance. And I was getting a bit confused by in the project world and the analogy of the Formula One car or manufacturing type thing. If you the analogy, drop it into risk management, how you do risk management can be a governed thing, but what your risks are is part of your project. So I was trying to relate this to P3M and all that. Do you all have bodies which dictate, mandate how to do things? That is your governance. What then your project is there to do and how it's doing it and what the risks are on that project is project management, not governance. So I was hearing like a mixture of governance and execution. Like a gated process. Companies govern the need to do gates. The execution of those gates is then project management. So I was trying to understand, and Chris, it started touching on it with governance of governance. Do you all have, are you saying, no mandated governing ways of doing things in some of your projects? And I can only think if you're a one project entity, which then is the company, then you probably could get quite a confusion with what's governance and then execution, if that helps. Because we govern our projects, but then we execute projects. So the whole, like you were sort of talking about portfolios and delaying certain projects to fund the other projects. In a governing sense, the governing of that would be you appoint an individual or body to have the ability to make that decision on the funding or delaying of projects. So that's all, governing delegations of authority in terms of financial levels. But it can be cut many ways, if that helps.
I think I see the distinction you're trying to make there, Darren, but I can see Chris, the two Chris's are both keen to come in. David may also have some big centric thoughts on that. But we'll give Chris W a start. Chris.
Okay, so I see governance as an onion, and the kind of like the biggest wrapper around governance should be the project board acting on behalf of the shareholders or the owners. And they set a general direction that the company should follow. And they also change that direction when it's appropriate to do so. But they'll do it in a formal way through the medium of board meetings, whatever it takes. But somebody's got to make a proposal, and nobody goes into a board meeting to change the direction of the company, not knowing what the proposal on the table is. So that's a form of governance, and it's again
in that case, that board you propose it to is the governing body to approve or reject. So that board has the ability to approve or object. That's your governance in play.
That's absolutely correct, but they are empowered to operate at a particular level, and there's other levels of governance below that. So I would argue that the next level of governance below that is the financial So, and especially, particularly in the P3M context, the next level below that is actually the financial management of the company. The level below that,
and that'll be documented, won't it? You'll know what that level is.
Yes, absolutely, and it's normally done through a series of delegation of authority tables that say a particular person at a particular level. But there's a level below that, which is before it goes down to like departmental managers. You've got the portfolios that are going to be spending quite a chunk of that financial money. For example, the change portfolio, and that will have a particular set of governance questions and dare I say the T word, tolerances within which it can operate.
Yep.
So it will be given an amount, a notional amount of money to spend over the year through the budgeting process. That
Yep.
budget will be the budget release, i.e. the groats and the shekels will be done through the Treasury, through the Finance Department, but it can be advised to make those releases within the tolerances of the portfolio itself, which needs to
Yep.
look at the portfolio in the broadest sense, but it doesn't look at the finances in the broadest sense, and it doesn't look at the company in the broadest sense either, because they're outside, they're layers that are wrapping around it. When you get to individual projects, they're also given a tolerance. They ask for and are given a tolerance, normally by the
Yep.
portfolio review bunch, and they have to operate within that tolerance. So this is the thing, and this is one cut through the onion. There will be others for different operating elements within the company, like for example, HR, like for example, operations, and they may have different routes through.
Happy with all what you're saying brilliantly, but at all of those different levels, and you talk about tolerance, it's set, it's known what that tolerance is, such that is your governance. Because if let's say something goes really bad and they go above it, then they typically, and if this is what you call in data, they have to stop and report up. In that governance, they know they've got that amount of money type thing, or they've delegated that amount. But if they know they've gone bust on day 2 when they've got another 150 days, then the governance will say, report up, elevate up, say you've got a problem.
I would say that the first thing there is assurance, which is the checking that the governance allowances have been adhered to.
Yeah. So you've got the governance, brilliantly, yeah. So you've got governance, and then you've got assurance, because then you're doing the checking. We've all got that. That's brilliant.
So guys, can I just remind everyone, the question is, do you design data from requirements or inherit from systems? I think we're talking about what I've heard somebody describe recently as the governance atlas, the map of what decisions need to be made for what, the dependencies, or what I'd call an accountability map. This is that topic set, I think, is around accountability within the big stuff, accountability and governance. And Darren's reference to having an ecosystem to manage governance, definitely is a big part of the big stuff. But I guess what we're fishing for here is there that entity that is doing that oversight, and is it and is the organization using governance as a north star for what information it needs to put together, or is it just cobbling together what it can in sporadic moments when it's asked to make decisions about stuff? Can we operate? Are we treating governance as something we have to respond to, or as a system we actually can build, and data being a fundamental underpinning part of that?
Just on that, David, could I just ask then? So if we have governance which says have gates, and we probably do govern what is required at those gates in the form of data, then the projects run and they have to produce that data and report it at the gates. So there's 2 parts. You've got the governing of the data, what's required at the gates, and then the projects which have to cobble the data, that's the painful bit, and report it at those gates to meet the governance.
Yeah.
So which do you mean both data, both bits of data, or just the project given the data at that gate? Are you calling that the data?
Well, there's data that you need for an instance when you present it, and there's the system of data that you need to have maintained so you can do that extract from it.
Yeah. Or thankfully we all have these spreadsheets to cobble it together to report it up. But
that's the question here. It's like, do we design? Do we get data together on the instance we need it, or is it some of it so fundamental and obvious that we can operationalize that data capture to make this delivery of governance operation a little bit easier and simpler for everyone?
Okay, I'll just say, in a governance sense, we mandate what data is required at the gate, but and because you get the what and the how you go about doing it, there could be endless number of systems and ways and means of doing it,
Exactly.
and tools and techniques.
So can we make that simpler for people? That's the big question. Rather than having everybody manufacture data as manufacture reports and stuff as a prototype, can we make are there ways that we can look at the underpinnings beneath that? So we don't
Yeah.
we'll use risk. We always issue. Are these two things as examples just not fundamental things that we should be building into how we work?
My only input there is context is key. Back to your analogy of one Formula One car and one Formula One car, or you're producing 6,000 widgets over many years and you're trying to get the same quality in, or you've got a portfolio of things. Context is key in that case, because you can spend billions on dictating the tool for that one Formula One car, and then you spend more on the system than you do on the Formula One car. A bit extreme here. Context bit, if you're a one-off massive portfolio, or, a big massive plant, construction build, or your business is projects, that's when the decisions will be more interesting and important. If you are a P3M company offering your services out to do anything and everything, then I would say systems, standardized data collection, but governance, pretty important if you want to make good profit and manage risk. If that helps, I'll shut up now.
So have we concluded, folks? I don't know if we've answered this question. Do you design data from requirements first or inherit it from systems? I'm thinking that what I've heard is that we'd like to define data for governance needs, but we're not entirely sure always that there's somebody defining and owning what those governance needs are. So it's then hard to define and build the systems if that leadership isn't in place. So I think what I'm suggesting, Darren, is that what you're suggesting is that this culture, this ecosystem of governance. I don't know that is in place in as many organisations as we'd like it to be. So then we can't build the data infrastructure to make that culture or infrastructure of the operating system of governance work effectively.
Yes, and again, context. If you're an operation doing ad hoc projects versus if you're a project organisation, those are the two extremes. So if I'm spending your money, David, do you just do the one-off, or do you set yourself up for long-term success if you're doing many gates or many projects? I'm giving that as the extreme type thing. But cool. Understand it a little bit better now. What you're meaning by governance.
All right. So just to add to that, Ed popped in the chat. Data is inherited from the business systems, making it challenging to verify and validated by the team. And I just saw Eliza. Did you just have your hand up as well?
Yes. I just wanted to say one thing before I drop off because I do need to go.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Maybe I will give a quick intro since this is my first time joining you guys. So I connected with David not too long ago because I was working on an integration tool, a data tool, a data modeling tool. I mean, you could call it a couple of different things. But then finding the big community was kind of interesting to me because a lot of what you guys discussed and work around regarding information and data is pretty much what I'm building towards. That's just a quick introduction to myself.
Hey, welcome to Book Club.
Thank you. And basically, what I would like to share some comments on is, I think the subtle thing I'm kind of picking up from the discussion right now, and which I've also kind of recently run into with regards to the stuff I'm working on, is that information requires perspective and context. A lot of the time, we would like for things to be as straightforward as saying, this is how everything is designed and this is how it works. And would like to say it's best to have information come from systems so that it's straightforward, it's structured, and stuff like that. And then we will also like to say, I think requirements are better because they help, I guess, keep structure and governance and I guess maybe help with a little bit of coherence with information. But sometimes we do not always get it as straightforward as that. And so I guess figuring out a system or a direction or some sort of implementation that allows perspective in the moment is what is probably most ideal. Is definitely not a simple way to look at things. It definitely doesn't reduce complexity and help make things I guess work a little bit more efficiently. But overall, it's probably the best case scenario in any given situation to be able to say, okay, we are looking at this information from this angle. What if we can look at the same information from a different angle? What does that say? And so that is, I just kind of wanted to throw out this comment because it's kind of like the thing I'm kind of hearing without anyone saying very explicitly.
So I think we're saying
Okay, thank you.
need the data, but you need that context and wrapper around it.
Data's just data without insight, I guess.
Pretty much, yeah. And sometimes what that insight is how does information relate on a fundamental level? How does it relate on a higher level? And I mean, you can expand and increase whatever perspective you are trying to look at the information through.
Okay, lovely. I think it's definitely time we moved on to our second prompt. I said we'd get some good discussion going. So before we finally leave this topic, Chris, do you have anything pithy you would like to just sort of add as a last comment?
Yeah, the one from me is kind of responding to the question. We do governance so that good decisions can be made. So we need to ask the governance owner, what is the minimum viable information that you need to make a good decision? If we can't get to that, then we're absolutely screwed. And then the systems must come and support that. They're a supporting element. They're not a driving element. If we don't have the data, we're going to find a way of getting it. So this is not chicken and egg. It's not circular. If you want to make good decisions and the decision maker has said, I need this information to make good decisions, if you don't get it, you're condemning the organization to not make good decisions. That's it from me.
Agree with all that. Chris Bragg?
Yeah. And I'd just like to add that one of the key things that we haven't really brought up here yet is there's a set of data we need to measure governance performance. Compliance has been shown to be not suitable to really be a good way of making governance better. And we've seen that across the globe in terms of a different way of looking at governance. And to do that, we need to be able to measure our governance and how well is it working. And of course, there's management decisions and executives making management decisions. That's one thing. Then there's governance, and is that improving the way our organization runs? Are we getting closer to our purpose? Are we doing our strategy better because of the way our governance helps it do that? And to do that, we need a whole lot of data that tells us if governance is working and how to improve it. And that can only come from designing it around what you need to measure governance. You can't get that any other way, I would suggest.
Indeed. So just as we've moved on from measuring the iron triangle solely as a measure of project success, so project delivery is not the total success of the project, without further consideration, same for governance. I like that, Chris. Okay, should we move on to prompt number 2, please? Brilliant. So where is your information coming from? Is it sent by people and generated in a clear way? Are you accessing it from an independently viable system? So big stresses that multiple sources are fine, but they should integrate via common references. Can you join your data easily? Or does integration demand manual effort every time? As a PMO, I personally find this one so absolutely triggering in terms of the hours of my life I have spent hunting down siloed, manual, corrupted, awful data and trying to gather it, manipulate it, verify it. Abject nightmare. Okay, Chris. You're on mute.
Yes, I said it triggers me as well. And what it triggers me about is that in order to compare apples with apples, it kind of helps if they are comparable, both in terms of the provenance of the data and when it was harvested and how it's been assured. Because in my view, no data should go forward to a governance for a governance decision without having a degree of assurance against it. Just to check that it's come from the same place, and the risk data hasn't come from a project manager's Excel risk log, not the corporate risk management system, and the PM's risk log has only got a 3x3 matrix, and the corporate one has got 5x4. So those numbers, that they've got to be of the same dimension, but they also need to be temporarily, not temporarily, but time-wise, they need to be aligned. So there's no point taking data from a project a month before your governance decision, and another project which may be competing for the same resources has the data taken yesterday, because one set of data is going to be better than another set of data. So that degree of assurance, which gives confidence to the decision maker that the information put in front of them that they need to make the best business decision is actually as good as we can get it. And I deliberately didn't say perfect, because perfect doesn't exist, but it needs to be as good as we can get it and as aligned as we can get it, so that if it comes to flipping the coin, we trust the information that's sitting in front of us.
And that's something we rarely overtly discuss, isn't it? Maybe sometimes if audit comes along and has a bit of a poke around, or maybe if we've got second or third line asking some questions, but it's rare that we have an executive style conversation along the lines of, is this data comparable? Where did we come from? Who's reviewed it? Blah, blah, blah.
Well, the danger is that they do ask those questions because they don't trust it, and that makes your governance forum a talking shop rather than a decision-making body. So that provenance has to be firmly established, and there's got to be somebody who's accountable for the provenance and the assurance of the provenance of that data, who is saying to the executive or the sponsor or the decision maker, you don't need to worry about the data. You've got to whether the data's good, I've looked after that for you. What you need to work out is what is the best decision that you can make at this moment in time, because the data is good.
Okay, Alex, I think you were second over Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah, interesting. I worked for an organization that was quite agile, and the CIO who I reported to was very agile. And we tried to join up the data, and we said, well, we have access to all the data in all the systems. We have access to the analysts and the people who build the dashboards and link everything together. So what is verified? So we then said, well, it must be the HR data and the finance data. But after we came across a few hiccups, we realized that there are levels of tolerance in the finance systems and the HR systems as well. So you're always going to have to go forward with a certain amount of fuzziness, because your finance systems might be updated every month. And I'm talking about, you've got retrospective data, which is harder, but a lot of things in there are forecasts and estimates and clever stats. HR data, HR is a moving feast. You've got lots of staff turnover in a large organization. So you can have multiple sources of fine. You can reduce the manual effort if you have all this data on systems. You have some clever person with Power BI or whatever it's called, or some clever reporting tool. But verified, you will still be verified with tolerances.
Okay, Chris.
Absolutely, Alex and Chris. I think being able to trace the data, critical to what Alex was saying there. If we can't trace it back because there's been some collation of data that now hides things like peaks, and we've only got averages and things like that. And where we've got granularity of data. So what level does this data pertain to in the organization or within a particular structure, data structure? And that's been a key issue that I've seen in many, many places, is trying to resolve this granularity issue, which can be a time one, but can also be a straightforward kind of quantity one, right? So, but in my experience, in putting together like a full corporate database for a very large mining organization, by far the biggest difficulty was the political element. Who owns this data? Who can decide if this data can be changed and when it can be changed and how it can be changed? That took me far longer than any technical issue of sorting out the other problems in the data, and things like granularity. If you want to resolve that, you have to go to the 3 different parties who use this data in different ways for different things, and each want to have it summed up their way or reported their way. Now you have to go and resolve that, and that's a business issue, may also be a political issue. It's a much bigger job than just technically getting this data together.
Yeah, there's definitely something about data ownership, isn't there? I think there's many organizations where there is no explicit data owner. It might be obvious who manipulates the data or enters the data maybe, but there isn't necessarily an owner.
Issue. It's an out and out governance issue. So who is allowed to make decisions about this data? Who is allowed to change this data? It's a governance issue.
Yeah. Chris, I will come to you, but I really like what David put in the chat here about Alcoa. So in the pharma industry today, we work on core Alcoa principles. So data must be attributable, legible, contemporaneous, going to your point, Chris, original and accurate.
Yeah.
And then Ed says the data and its sources must be verifiable, traceable, auditable. Data integrity and ownership is extremely important in this context. So, yeah.
I just chip in there because part of the project we're looking is we have real issues in how we manage our data. We're a very data-driven business. So data governance and stewardship in itself is a big, big deal. I think sometimes we don't apply it to our projects very well because the projects are very temporary and quick moving. So that's kind of the principles we try and hold. This is a Cola Plus and a Cola Plus Plus and all this kind of stuff. But when you're thinking about the trustworthiness of your data, I think it's easier to hold a framework like that to kind of like, well, how does it stack up? Yeah, because I think when I was hearing to people, they were touching on various bits of that. So I just think having some kind of, right, this is what good data should consist of, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these kind of principles, it helps understand if it's trustworthy enough to be used, and then will it pass muster to go in front of a board? Yeah, and of course, I think the one thing I just mentioned there is who's accountable for making this data, who's accountable for changing it. Really important if you want to survive, I think.
I like that as well, because you could easily turn that into like a little heat map or something, couldn't you? You could put your data types down and put, you know, we're terrible on this, but we're really good on this, and give it a sort of sense of where your data is failing, where it's quite solid.
Heat maps, now we're talking PMO for sure.
What can I say?
Not only who's allowed to do it, but are they doing it? And how well are they doing it?
Quite. Data-driven PMOs, exactly, Ed, yes. All right, Chris, sorry, you did have your hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo everything that's been said, both David and Ed. Really like these approaches. I've only ever been in one organisation that has been truly data-driven and has data governance in place. And it's a massive overhead, but that doesn't mean that it's not important. Smaller companies are just not going to get their head around why data governance is important. But I think an important question for any decision maker in a governance forum to make is who owns this data? And I'm going to hold their feet to the fire that the data's in good shape. Now that's true data ownership. I've been in one organisation that's had a company-wide data dictionary, and that has driven how Power BI has been used to leverage the data and to inform the business. It's a massive overhead. It doesn't fit well with agile organizations who like to work on a project by project basis and do their own thing.
So Chris, having had the luxury of this experience, how did you find it differed from other places? Like, what were the benefits of this overhead that you could explicitly see?
Trust. But lethargy. It makes the organization lethargic because there are a lot of people who are engaged in verifying the veracity of data on behalf of the data owner. And although it helped decision making at a higher level, what it did do is it created an overhead in the yet another overhead in the organization, which had 5 lines of defense from a risk perspective. And you've got to ask the question, so who's actually making stuff?
5 lines of defense. Wow. Trust is good, but control is better, Chris.
Well, this was 3 overlapping first lines of defense, which was totally unnecessary. And they kept citing the Swiss cheese model, which is totally deprecated now, because we all know that cheese isn't a barrier to anything.
Okay. Chris, I think you were next. And you're on mute.
Yeah. What we found was where we had a proper one single data dictionary and one single third normal form database for the whole organization, no replication of data anywhere. And that covered things from the school to shops to running a mining business, security, engineering, etc., geology, everything, right? And that achieved a lot of savings, actually, for the organization. So yes, I had some tough run-ins with systems analysts and programmers and things at the time who would like to have made up their own data structure and put it in place and done it more quickly than they could do it by coming to me, even though we'd automated and built code that generated all this stuff for them. But those same people who complained 3 years later, who were now in more senior IT positions, actually made a point of calling me up and saying how much money and time they were saving because they had this one data dictionary that was trustworthy and where everything was, and there was only one source for any bit of data anywhere, and they knew who owned it and who they had to go to fix it, etc. And it just saved them so much time. There were other things that we were able to save, do a lot of things in the organization that saved maybe 10% in the overall IT budget just because we had that data under control.
So it was an overhead that they at least found worth it. David?
I've got three very quick points. Firstly, where is the information coming from? Firstly, I guess it needs to come from a common language. So there's no reason why, for example, if in different parts of the organization we talk about a risk, we can talk about a risk a common way and build a common language together. Ownership, absolutely vital. Where's this stuff come from? Where's the provenance of it? If I don't understand the provenance, I don't believe it. So I would almost argue that if we're looking at a particular dashboard, then somebody needs to understand where that information's come from so I can trust it. The other thing that we haven't talked about is security. So there are going to be permission models and things that people are allowed to see and not allowed to see. So we need to make sure that we're not seeing information that we're not meant to see, and that's a big issue with AI, that it will go and find information and collate it or present it for us when it's not meant to have got hold of that and presented it to us. So that's an unknown, that's a massive unknown, unstated capability that we need, and the AI itself can do some hard work for us. But one thing I think. We use this language, we use this phrase common dictionary. I think that's pertinent to the language of what we're speaking about. But I think we can, as an organization, have common data schemes. So an employee, what's my ID? What's my code scheme from an employee? What's the hierarchy of objectives that we have? What are the project codes that we're using? What are the finance classifications? I see a lot of organizations struggling and messing about trying to botch data together because they haven't settled on a common way of defining the fundamental things. So where is the information coming from? It's got to have the same language. It's got to have clear ownership. It's got to be clearly secure. It's got to have ideally a common code scheme that you can manage. And I think these days with modern IT, with AI capabilities, we should be able to make this a lot easier than it has been in the past, and a less of an overhead to have to worry about too much. That's my view.
Okay, thanks, David. Time's ticking on a little bit. Should we hustle forward to the next slide, please?
I'm trying.
Ooh, where is your single source of truth? So Big promotes a data warehouse or an integrated model, not point-to-point chaos. But ask honestly, is there one trusted source, or is it depends who you ask? That's a good one for a lot of places. Chris.
The first thought that comes to mind, and I'll have to disappear after this, I'm afraid, is how do we ensure that similar data in different systems is not interpreted in different ways? Because you can see overlap across all of those on the diagram, and it will always be the case. So where is it arbitrated? What is the source that is deemed gold rather than silver or bronze or tin? That's the thought in my mind. Where you've got a distributed data model, there will be overlaps. There has to be overlaps, and where you haven't got a company-wide data design, then you need to be utterly careful about where you pluck your data from.
There's definitely something in that, and there's definitely something about repurposing data. That data is just data, right? But we use it for different purposes. So when we repurpose it for something it wasn't originally intended for, is that skewing in some way? Frequently, yes.
Can I ask Chris, is plucking too unserious a word? So when we're talking about supporting decision making, is plucking not a serious enough phrase for putting it?
Harvesting, is that better?
Well, it's like for me, if we're going to go to a decision making forum, then we'll have carefully selected and found and verified the information that we've got. So
Yes, but the challenge is where similar data is held elsewhere and is not included, but it might be included in other decision making bodies, forums. So, for example, you might have a product governance board and a project governance board, and the linkage there. So there will be absolutely some linkage on commercial and finance. For product, it will be their profit and loss. For the project, it will be the incremental business case. But it may the same. Sorry, data from different sources may be used in a way that is just not integrated. It's not coherent, and you get the conversations, one in projects, one in product. I thought you meant ...
Yeah.
And we can't afford an I thought you meant. The business case is the business case. That's got to be linked to both why are we doing the project and how profitable is the product. But there are going to be some bits of information that are not properly aligned.
Well, there's language like what's my risk? What does risk description mean? So there's language to align. Ownership. To if we've got two people thinking they own the same piece of data, that's a problem to solve. But codes, I think a lot of this is code schemes, is underlying schema and structure. And I think I mentioned last time I've seen a multi-billion-pound helicopter built with a code scheme for the engineering management and a code scheme for the project management, and the two didn't quite match. So I think there's more effort needs to go into common code schemes to get the language right, sort out the ownership, arrive at common code schemes, look after the security. I think that's good practice, and support and govern it to make sure
that's configuration management of your data world, and ironically, that's one of the things that dropped out of Prince 2. It's no longer in Prince 2, and it's absolutely critical. Well, how can you do change management if you can't do configuration management? Because change management is applying a change to a config management item. So I agree. So the data dictionary is not just whether a field is of binary D word or anything else. It's the usage and the meaning that has to be in there as well, because the dictionary is useless without meaning.
Yep. I mean, how many of us use the word issue and risk? I mean, how many of us have got our own local spreadsheets for this meeting and that meeting that collate issue and risk? And I'm sure they're all got different columns along the top.
Yeah, Chris Bragg, you still got your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the key thing here is, I think this question really emphasizes the point made in topic 1, is that you need to design your governance data. And this is a key part of it. So at this level, for decision making, this is the data that we need for it. At this other level, in this other place for decision making, it may well be a different flavor of that data that is more pertinent in that case. we need to plan and think about that and design it in and make sure that we're picking the right data from what we have for the purpose of governance at that specific point in the governance model. So I don't think you can answer this, not just the single source of the truth, but yeah, is that a verifiable, traceable, proper, believable single source of the truth? But also, if there are multiple sources of truth, which is the right one to use for decisions at this point in time, this level in the organization?
And should you have a copy of it?
Yeah, and you understand.
Why have you
what
got a
the
copy of
difference
that
is.
version of the truth? You shouldn't have that
Yeah.
copy. Yeah,
Yeah, and you also understand that there is another version somewhere used elsewhere, so everybody's in the loop.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Okay, well, we've got 4 minutes left, and we've had to have obviously several people drop. So, David, have you got any final thoughts? You still got your hand up. I think that might be an accident.
Oh, sorry. Yes. I don't know how to put it down, to be honest.
Okay, don't worry about that. Did you have any final thoughts?
I just think this whole data thing I think there's an operational aspect to, we all want to operate governance effectively, whether that's our Formula One car prototype. We've got this big decision we all have to bust a gut to build up to this, or whether we have background governance, which is operational almost, that every week this board's got to make decisions on. Whichever kind of governance framework it is. I think the implication is here that I think we can build our data operation to be a little bit more supportive of the governance, and perhaps we can instead of being fobbed off with an organization that gives us a whole lot of crud data, we should be a bit more picky and assertive about what information we want, and make sure we have the support and the technology and the capability to supply us with that, rather than just take tosh we get that's collated in from spreadsheets that we've got no clue about. I think we should be more demand as governance professionals. We should be more picky and prescriptive about the data capability that exists, and not just take rubbish that we're given.
Yeah, agree with that. But whilst recognizing the natural limitations of, cost, effort, overhead that, and lack of ownership that needs to be addressed sometimes to improve the data quality or take grip on it. Alex, have you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, I've been thinking throughout this whole chat that if we were building an organization from scratch, we could easily do all this stuff. But if I'm thinking of the majority of organizations I've worked for in the last 30 odd years, they've got legacy systems that don't capture what we now realize is key data. There are bodges. People used to say, well, we'd like to put 10 fields in, but we've got a limitation that we can only put 2 fields in. So granular data doesn't exist in many large organizations for historical reasons. It doesn't mean that when you build new systems, you shouldn't have the ability to capture that granular data, but where you're stuck with legacy systems, you're stuck. Don't know if that adds anything.
No, I think that's quite useful, Alex. Maybe I hear a lot of organizations talking about technical deficit. So we built up a lack of investment in our tech over the years. We have a technical deficit. Maybe we should start talking about a data deficit in the same way that we haven't gone back.
I know somebody who does.
Excellent. There you go. Could be a new movement. Chris?
Well, yeah, I think it's a governance data deficit, quite honestly.
Yes.
That's what we hear about. It's a governance deficit completely. But I think all the organizations that I've worked in to implement these kind of things were all existing organizations with loads of old data, shall we say, right? And they all had to be addressed and fixed in one way or another. And that depends on there being sufficient interest, support for whatever part of governance you're looking at to actually go ahead and say, yes, we're going to do this and we're going to find a way to technically do this suitably. And then we're going to go ahead and do it. So in the mine case, we simply threw out all the old systems and all the old data and changed it all over into a new system with new applications and revised data and new data capturing, etc. Many organizations, most of the others couldn't do that, didn't bite the bullet and do that. But we found the ways to find the right data that we needed and then to get it brought in and collated in the right way with all the other data that we needed to match it with for the governance aspect.
Okay, lovely. Any very brief final comments from either Darren or Ed, or anything you want to pop in the chat?
It's Darren here. My only challenge is what context, again, is key. What data are you missing or haven't you got? Versus, and that will dictate what the solution is, or whether you can have it at project linked to portfolio. Because the biggest one I chuckle at is the portfolio risk is different to the project risk, and the summating it up. So I'm using it as an example that you've got to be careful about putting all that project risk data in and thinking you're going to get a portfolio risk position without a lot of constraints on it. So just looking at this diagram, I'm just fascinated by, that people are challenged by this data position for projects, for P3M type thing on such a scale. It's my lack of understanding then in this space, in what many organizations have got as a challenge, be it, on top of the basic core data, which has a lot of standards around it, sort of cache and time and that. It's a known unit. And then obviously on some of governance terms, it's not necessarily a lot of data, because it can be like key gate information, I would say. So it's not a lot of noughts and ones type thing. So I was just fascinated by this is clearly a challenge for many because you're discussing it. So bit of lack of knowledge on my part, maybe.
Well, this is what we find through these conversations, Darren, is that there's a lot of commonality of experience, but there's an awful lot of variance as well, actually. And organizations can be surprisingly different, and people, even quite experienced people's experiences can be very diverse as well in terms of what they have and haven't come across. Depends, what types of places you've tended to work. I feel like somebody wanted to chip in there.
I was just going to say that I think the core data set's pretty straightforward, objective, metric's quite a complicated one, but that can mean anything. Task, risk, issue, action, decision. We're not talking a lot of specific data types. What we're talking about is selection of it, categorization of it, aggregation of it, and security of it. So
and those middle parts, they're challenging by the very definition of them, like risk, issues, because they're context specific. So I'm still trying to find a professor who can really add up different risks in without categorizing them, different risks to synthesize them up. I'm still trying to find that professor.
For example, like give me a summary portfolio risk from all these program risks, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's different. It's different. There might be a relationship, but it's not. I don't. Yeah. I mean, a cost code. It's dead simple. 1.1 adds up. 1.1 and 1.2 add up into one. But portfolio risk doesn't equal program project risk, does it? It's not the same thing.
Yeah, it's that lack of ability to mechanically roll up. Ooh, and we really are at time. So, Chris, final thoughts. Go on mute.
Good, unmuted. Okay, that just listening there, and I think the key thing there is we talk about decision making and governance, and a big part of this is making sure not just that you have this immediate data and the information, should I say, rather than data, but that you have the context for the decision as well. And that's, I think, so important to this integrated piece of integrated governance, that very often all the data you need and the information is very specific to your mandate as a governing body or a decision maker, right, about your project or your portfolio. But the context you need is the broader organization and how will this impact there, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I think the other thing that we need to make sure of in this data is that we have the data that gives you the context as well as the specific information bits.
Just data to me, the context data, numeric data. Yeah, it's data. It's raw.
Yeah, I think the context is typically much broader than the topic that you're looking at. And that's what very often gets missed, because we're looking in portfolios, we're thinking about our portfolio and our projects in our portfolio, and we're not thinking about other portfolios and products and business as usual. And we don't have any data on that, even if we are thinking about it, because nobody's given us that context.
Right, lovely. And on that note, thank you so much for being here and all your contributions this evening. Ever a good discussion. We are now made it through halfway through the components. There's 8 components in big. In chapter 6, we've made it through half of them. We've done 4. So we will be pushing on next month to continue that journey. And we've also decided to extend the Bot Club to December, thanks to demand. So we were originally going to finish in July, but we're going to carry on through till December, albeit that we'll probably take a hiatus over the summer. So we will see you next month for June, and we'll issue out which topics in advance as before. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
Ciao for now.
That was really good.
Everybody.
Cheers.